Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukatali.
Well, a wonderful morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo and broadcasting on TV1, the only place to be here at 7 o'clock every weekday morning. And our guest this morning to discuss how attractive can and is Sri Lanka to foreign investors is a chartered wealth manager, Mr. Rainer Michael Price. Very good morning to you, Mr. Price.
Good morning.
And welcome on Newsline. Let's get straight to the point, shall we? How attractive is Sri Lanka from an economic point of view for investors from outside?
I think long term is very attractive. I mean, short term, as you know, there are some challenges. But the real question is, are we using these challenges in the right way to really make it? I mean, short term pain versus long term gain. It's very much about that. The IMF assistance package and all this. Are we using this and potentially even have some short term pain for real long term gain? And there, sometimes I think we are not seeing enough of a sense of urgency. While IMF is one thing, it's also the global world economy is changing, especially since Mr. Trump came to the White House. I mean, trade relations are being rethought. So maybe now is the time to become more active and really think, not just for the next 2 years, but think for the next 10 years.
Right. And you're based in Singapore.
That's right.
You have some exposure to Sri Lanka for a while now.
Yes.
So, do you see we've had challenges in the past, and we've put a war behind us, but the expectations of economic success in the same way that the war was a success in terms of bringing peace. So we've had these challenges. Do you see these challenges easing now, or are some of these challenges still very much here?
Yeah, look, I mean, there are always challenges. I mean, if you wouldn't have challenges, maybe we don't really live.
Yes.
But I would argue that, look, I mean, Sri Lanka with over 6% GDP growth is actually very attractive for global investors.
Yeah.
And because you see, some of the challenges we have in Sri Lanka as well are partly due to the fact that we have challenges in the global economy. The IMF, again, the other day said, look, global growth is still too low for the sake of the global economy, and that is partly due to a lot of these Western problems we have, in the sense that we had so much quantitative easing, we had so much money printing in the Western world that distorted currency values, but to some extent it has helped equity markets recover, capital markets recover since the global financial crisis. But the core of the issue is what we saw in the United States, and also what we're now seeing in Europe, that many people are not feeling that economic recovery. The rise of populism, right, is sometimes partly blamed on this whole question about too much quantitative easing. And that, of course, the whole world economy could do much better. So a lot of these questions that you raised are actually beyond Sri Lanka.
Right.
But don't forget, we're also going through what is often called as the fourth industrial revolution. How an economy works in the 21st century with potentially artificial intelligence and so forth is very different to the economy of the past. So now Sri Lanka is at a sort of as a turning point whereby if you really embrace this new economy, the country could do very well, because we've got qualified labor, we've got national beauty in the country. A lot of these things could go very well for Sri Lanka, but now is the time to really not just think about competing in the current environment, but think about how do we compete in the future. And maybe that's we're not seeing enough. I mean, maybe now the IMF should be a sign of getting a little bit more paranoid. And look, I mean, what happened in Korea? I mean, Korea went through maybe an even worse IMF program, right? Remember, the Koreans always joke IMF stood for I am fired. But since then, Korea has completely turned around, and now in Sri Lanka as well, Korea is a major investor, and they use these IMF challenges to really take the country to the next level.
Isn't there some sort of almost a sort of stigma attached to a country having an IMF program imposed on it?
Yeah, historically, yes, and maybe because certain things could have done better or differently, put it this way. But then look at South Korea, that was a turning point. Again, it was the IMF program for Korea was short-term pain, and a lot of pain for a lot of people, to create really long-term gain. And maybe we should approach it here the same, that now is a time, and especially since it is underpinned by the IMF, to really sort of think about how do we want to position the country for the future, even if that means that short term there will be some disappointment or some inconvenience. And I think it is that mindset to embrace these short-term inconveniences for a better future. And that's what I think we need to do more of.
And is the onus more on the private sector in talking about strictly on a Sri Lankan perspective? Right. What should the private sector be doing? I mean, they're not being left alone by the government, because this government, for example, came in and straight away imposed the super gains tax backdated, and so all corporates who made over 2 billion rupees in that particular tax year were suddenly expected to cough up 25%. And so there hasn't been consistency of policy. What if you were advising private sector companies, what would you ask them to do, apart from pay out, because they've been asked to pay out?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is a very good question, but I suppose the private sector always needs to be resourceful. I mean, this is part of being in business. You deal with the cards, you accept the cards you're dealt with and try to make the most out of it, right? But I would say that also I think governments are changing in the sense that now increasingly there's even a concept known government as a service. Because with increasingly transparency through the internet, transparency through the blockchain, even governments and how they engage with their own business community and their own people is changing because of technology. I mean, we have Facebook, we have the internet, we have social media that is very much changing the structure of society. And again, here increasingly it's this concept of government as a service. So again, it links all these questions you raised, they link to sort of, is it the economy of the past or is it the economy of the future? And I think this is also when we think about the United States for a minute, a lot of these issues that Mr. Trump brought up in his election, they can't be easily fixed, because the economy he is referring to is the economy of the past. Now we're actually thinking about the fourth industrial revolution as a completely different environment. And that, yes, there is no easy answer to that. It's more about being progressive and forward-looking and accept a lot of these challenges, because...
Progressive and forward-looking.
Yes.
And I must... I don't know if you know the background of the Maharaja organization, and you spoke of dealing with the cards that one is dealt with. And back in 1983, the Maharaja organization was reduced to ashes thanks to various violence acts against, in the beginning of the ethnic conflict. And with a view towards progress and supporting this country and being patriotic, the Maharaja Group shareholders and directors took a decision about a week after the trouble started back in 1983 to rebuild and to carry on. And today, I will mention this because today is the annual Executive of the Year Awards for our group, and will be held in the state-of-the-art studio facility at Stein Studios in Ratmalana, which was the site of two of our major factories back in '83 when it was burnt to cinders. And our chairman, Mr. Rajendran Rajamahendran, was there inspiring people, and long before it was built, he could virtually smell the new building long before it was ever built. And so today we are very proud to be still here, and we intend to be here for a long time yet. And it is our Executive of the Year Awards, and everyone must be on tenterhooks because they don't know if they are going to win. Who's going to win? Who knows? We'll tell you all about that later on in the day today. But I mentioned this because we are a privately held group, and we are in all sorts of things. But we didn't hold back on what happened. Shareholders had the vision to take us forward. and here we are. So that's why I ask you, what should the private sector do when you have all these sort of economic bits that are pulling from all sides, holding one back?
Look, that is a very good question, and I think the honest truth is there is no easy answer to that complicated question. But look what's happening now in the United States. Some people feel that Mr. Trump, if you agree with him or disagree with him, at least he succeeded in unleashing animal spirits of the economy. The economy is becoming hopefully more dynamic because of some of these potential changes he's trying to sort of mix. Because people say he's a businessman, they try to make the United States more business friendly. That potentially is unleashing these sort of animal spirits, and that's what we see in the stock market. The U.S. equity market again has an all-time record high. It is maybe that what needs to be done, right? I mean, unleashing that potential, because as you know, Sri Lanka always had a lot of potential. Have we done the most out of it? Maybe not yet. And I think the emphasis on not on yet, but that maybe could be the sort of motivating force, that you have a lot of natural resources, beautiful country, and you potentially now could really take it to the next level. And then this IMF thing, you mentioned whether it's a stigma.
Yeah.
Well, it is what it is, and maybe now is the time to really think even harder and rethink how things were done in the past to potentially have a better future.
Yeah, so like in the past, at independence, Sri Lanka had many a gilded prospect for it. And several years after independence, which we got in 48, we seem to still be struggling.
Well, life is always struggle, right? I mean, sometimes. But things have improved a lot, my understanding is. I've been visiting the country for the last 10 years, and each time I actually see further improvement, right?
Moving on to the sort of current, with the, and this is a question that's come in from one of our regular viewers, with the TPP in doubt and a new regional comprehensive economic partnership in the making, mid-income nations in South Asia, such as Myanmar, Cambodia and Vietnam, will also attract wealth. So what would investors look as a USP from Sri Lanka?
Very good question. I think it's pro-business policies and really a level playing field. And don't forget, look, and this is a very important point, you mentioned mid-income countries. Yeah. You're competing against other mid-income countries, but you're competing with robotics, right. Artificial intelligence, right? People who don't complain if they work the whole day because they're robots, right? So again, that fourth industrial revolution potentially is going to change a lot of manufacturing industries, right? Even in many Western countries, there's a belief that artificial intelligence could destroy 20% of the jobs that we know. So are we preparing for that? So again, it's not because now we're in a really global economy, we're not just competing against other similar countries in the stages of development, we're actually competing against robotics. And that hasn't really, I think, been brought up enough. Remember the machine against human, right? We're not competing against other humans, we're competing against machines. Correct. And I think, Sri Lanka is already quite good in certain aspects of the technology industry. If you remember, the London Stock Exchange apparently runs on Sri Lankan technology.
It does,
Many people don't know that.
Yes.
But those sort of things is the right way to go, right? Embrace technology, right? Apparently even the South African Stock Exchange, I didn't know this either before, is running on Sri Lankan technology. Yeah. That's the way to go. Embrace technology and really, like in particular instance, try to create a niche for the country.
And another question. Singapore has recently signed a common reporting standards agreement with the UK and the European Union, and we believe is considering a similar arrangement with neighbouring countries, with neighbouring Indonesia. Will these developments create an opportunity for Sri Lanka to attract wealth from Singapore?
Look, wealth is global these days, right? And what you mentioned, these so-called common reporting standards, is also a global trend. And it's not just just only rules and regulations. It's also technology, right? We're living in a global world that increasingly everything is transparent. Thanks to Google, thanks to the internet and technology trends, everything is very transparent. And increasingly that's the new normal. So yes, Sri Lanka will over time also be part of that. I think you can't go backwards, right? And hence it means that you need to look at how you structure things, how you invest, and how you do business. It's different in a in a much more transparent world. I mean, you in the media, look at how Mr. Trump, as President of the United States, has actually changed your industry, the media.
Indeed.
Because now as the President directly to the people on Twitter account.
Yes. Yeah.
Nobody would have thought about this, right? And again, everything is much more transparent, rightly or wrongly. I mean, at least it's there, right? And I think these trends are for real. And again, you need to change the mindset. Again, the whole question, what is privacy? I mean, blame it on Google maybe, but privacy is more a thing of the past. I mean, the European Union has lawsuits about some of these things, the right to be forgotten. And common reporting standards actually makes it that, yes, even things from the past potentially are still there. I mean, due to the internet and technology. And I think this is a trend that many people are still underestimating.
How do you find, talking about transparency, how do you find transparency from your perspective as far as Sri Lanka is concerned? You know, you're a wealth manager and so on. It obviously must feature.
It has improved, and I think it's also a journey, right? And I think, look, the biggest thing that is coming in the future, or already here, is the so-called blockchain, right? Distributed ledger technology, where even the stock exchanges and financial services can be on the electronic digital ledger, where then everything is transparent. And it fundamentally will change society, right? And many countries are already adopting this new technology and the blockchain, and I think that over time will lead to ever more transparency, because everything is time spent, smart contracts and things like that. That is potentially a real opportunity for countries that maybe in the past, for historic reasons or some other reasons, were not as transparent. They can actually adopt that and hence can leapfrog. It's a bit like the technology. I mean, I understand you spend a lot of time in the UK. Some emerging markets have a better telecom infrastructure than some of the developed markets. And I think we can see the same here. It's more about the mindset of whether you embrace these new technologies.
And there is what are your thoughts, Michael, on the apartment construction boom and sales? And, you know, do you see an economy in the medium long term to sustain such development? We have a big boom in apartment construction and so on.
Yeah, look, I mean, construction activity is a very important part of the economy and the economic expansion, but it should not be only driven by real estate, because real estate is a sector that's important, but it should be really much more about more diversification of economic sectors, right? And again, as I understand it here, there's not really a fear that we could have a property bubble, because I think financing rules are quite strict here and things like that. So I think it is actually manageable and is helping. But I think not just property, it's also increasingly knowledge industries, information technology, where the growth should come from, right? Because economies who did that, who just focuses on real estate appreciation like Japan in the late 80s, later suffered from that. So again, you have to be careful if you just have too much of a property boom, because it's potentially even a sort of an unproductive asset, right? I mean, it's good to have many apartment buildings, but it's maybe not the most productive asset. You should also invest in, again, the industries of the future.
And what about the, as you observe Sri Lanka and its progress, or not in some cases, how do you view the government tango with, our government's tango with China and the Indians?
It's a very good question, and I suppose it's all part of international relations, geopolitics, and I think it's like everything else, it's work in progress, right? The United States is now having increasingly a lot of debates about its relationships with China. The European Union is discussing its relationship with them among themselves. Even France, there were some people saying, look, maybe France should leave the euro. Look, maybe these things are life of politics and the world, but I suppose these sort of questions are increasingly raised. But then again, to the point about the private sector, governments have official views and unofficial views, but it's ultimately the business community and individual people who make things happen. And there we're already living in a global economy, right? So I think every government increasingly should think about government as a service, make it a very attractive environment, and then maybe step back and let the economy take care of itself.
Right. And as a person connected with finances and so on, have you followed what's happened to our central bank? We've had huge controversy for a matter of 2 years now. and it's still raging, and it's unlikely to not rage until there is a logical conclusion. But how do you all view this, and you all as in from the financial market from outside?
Look, a very good question. I mean, I suppose, even though we had some of these, I mean, what's the right word you use? Controversies, maybe?
Yes.
Look, I mean, maybe it's a blessing in disguise that interest rates in the Western world are so low now. I mean, since the Trump administration came to power, U.S. interest rates had actually risen, but until then, even U.S. interest rates were next to nothing. So Sri Lanka, as a country which has very high interest rates, actually benefited from very low interest rates everywhere else in the world. Because people were looking for income. Now, as Western rates are rising, now this sort of yield differential becomes, it's more important to substantiate why people should invest here. Because if we have like trillions of dollars trading at negative interest rates in the Western world, 5-6% on Sri Lankan bonds looks interesting. But when global rates are rising, again, Sri Lanka needs to sort of justify that risk, so-called risk premium.
Right.
Of why would you take more, or why would you invest in other markets when you can have better returns in your own country?
We've had a big fluctuation in our foreign exchange rate. Is hardly being stable. We had a very huge fluctuation. So obviously that also has to be taken into account.
Correct, but that, if you recall, that's also to some extent the global issue, right? I mean, the United States dollars are trading on multi-year highs. Many emerging market currencies, Brazil, Turkey, among others, were trading at close to all-time record lows. So again, it's not just the Sri Lanka currency issue. It is a global issue of emerging market currencies against the United States dollar. And that has been a global trend. So sometimes if you live here, you think it's just a local, isolated case, but in this day and age, often a lot of these trends are global trends.
We had the offshore leaks, we had the leaks from Mossad Fonseca's database,
correct.
And I think we had another bank's leaks also, and so on. And it became apparent that there were a lot of Sri Lankan people also, and Singapore was featured. But then Singapore is like a neighbour to us, and the links to Singapore and Sri Lanka are quite significant.
Yes.
And with our group, I don't know if you know, but MTV and MBC, companies within our group, partnered with Singapore Telecom many years ago. And GSM, talk about technology, GSM was first introduced by our group in this region, and even before the United States. And that was with a Singapore company. So, sitting in Singapore and looking over towards Sri Lanka, really, how attractive is Sri Lanka to maybe the Singaporeans, because we are all in the same region?
Yeah, I think it's very attractive, and I think, look, I mean, we live in Singapore, and in Singapore the Minister Mentor, Lee Kuan Yew, apparently many years ago he opined that he wished that Singapore could be like Sri Lanka.
That's right.
And Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was a very visionary person. If you go to Singapore today, you see what they have created, but maybe that's the vision. When the Prime Minister of one of the most successful economies in the world at that time felt that his own country, Singapore that is, should be like Sri Lanka, and maybe now the time has come. And I would argue that now it is even easier to do that because of all these things, technology, and because you see, the world economy is fundamentally changing. I mean, we are going through, and this is why I think there's also a lot of issues with regards to why global GDP growth is actually below trend at the moment, right? The US is below trend, and remember, if you listen to Washington policymakers, they're saying, well, what is the solution to all these problems? More growth. But the growth will come from different areas. And this is where Sri Lanka can potentially, remember you spoke about trade, Trans-Pacific Partnership and all that, it's going to be a new economy going forward, and are we embracing that enough? I mean, sometimes it's used to sort of that Silicon Valley spirit. As you see, I'm European, we are struggling with the same thing, that Europe is maybe the old continent. Europe potentially is too backward looking. It needs to be more like, not just the United States, but more like Silicon Valley.
Yes.
And Sri Lanka potentially could become the Silicon, or the mindset of a Silicon Valley in that fourth industrial revolution, because also I think there's a lot of creative people here, and because it's increasingly a creative economy, content-driven.
Do you think, Michael, that the Sri Lankan investment opportunity ambience is has the courage to be different and the courage to take on these challenges that are coming along?
Very good question. Sometimes look, courage often it takes courage to have courage, and more importantly, sometimes it's. When we spoke about the IMF, look, I mean, coming back to this example about Korea, it took Korea a lot of courage to fundamentally change the way they've done things. But it's often only in a crisis. Remember, crisis is an invention of the mother of necessity, right? And that is actually what I don't see enough. I don't see enough a sense of crisis, right? We were sort of worrying about the IMF when we should really worrying about how this global economy is changing beyond what anybody thinks is possible. Again, think about, we spoke about middle-class income countries, we're competing against them. No, you're competing against robotics. Factories of robots instead of human workers.
But here, Michael,
yes.
Here, we are also fighting large-scale corruption.
Or what the legal system calls facilitated payments, right?
Yes, yeah. If you look at that report from about a year ago, it said that so much of money had flown out of the country, out of Sri Lanka, but not through the normal means. It was in the billions of dollars, and for a small economy like ours, and obviously it obviously matters.
Yes.
When you look at all these things going on in our country, and the litigation and the lack of resolution to these matters, and we've actually slipped in that corruption index as well. So, how much does it matter, or is it all built into that risk factor that we spoke of earlier?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a very good question, because the market on a daily basis reprices that risk, right? Or the perception of risk, rather, right? But to these questions about structure and how, again, this issue about transparency, I think it's increasingly more difficult to not adhere to rules, because everything increasingly is very open and very transparent. And it's a global phenomenon. You cannot really fight it. And I think especially the blockchain, right? Distributed ledger technologies, everything will be very transparent. And that is here to stay. It's a bit like when you spoke about 1994, right? When in 1994 people were trying to fight the internet. A lot of people didn't like this idea of the internet, right? A lot of people at the moment don't like these, for the reasons you mentioned, these new technologies like the blockchain, but maybe there's no way to fight it, right? And some countries already said that. For example, I've been to Africa the other day, and in Nigeria, the Central Bank of Nigeria said, look, we cannot fight Bitcoin or the blockchain. We need to embrace these things, because this ultimately brings a lot of transparency to how the economy is being structured. So this is a game changer like the internet that is rolled out around the world, and it's a new trend that is, I think, very important to embrace. Because it is literally what the IMF and the World Bank is saying, it's the fourth industrial revolution. And countries who adopt that as a mindset as well will increasingly be successful, others will not.
And when you advise your clients to have, if you advise them to have some investments in Sri Lanka or out of Sri Lanka, then what are the key fundamentals that you're looking at?
Look, as a global investor, the key fundamentals are ultimately country metrics. Country, for example, population growth, how much of that is basically driven by younger people in the economy who can really create the new wealth, and also rule of law, and more importantly, capital market structure and things like that. And again, as we said, maybe now we should have some more short-term pain for long-term gain, but I think long-term metrics look very good. If you think about it, it still has reasonable growth around 5-6%. That could potentially be higher, but it's not too bad in a world that is potentially below growth, right? And that is always the argument for emerging markets, why emerging markets potentially could still outperform both United States and Europe, because here is where the growth is.
Right.
Precisely because of some of the issues that you mentioned.
Right.
How we deal with that, that's a real art, and that's basically part of being a businessman and taking businessman's risk. But I think the upside potentially compensates for the potential inconveniences, if you want to call it, or even the risks.
Final question. Is it green for go? Is Sri Lanka good to go?
Yes, I think so. And don't forget, I mean, you spoke about whether the IMF is a stigma. It's also an opportunity.
Right.
And maybe we're not embracing that enough. I think I always look at Korea, right? I mean, Korea went through this IMF and it was terrible, remember? But they came out a winner. A winner that, look, I mean, you lived in the United Kingdom. I mean, like in most countries in Europe, they would wish to be like Korea now. I mean, I understand many people have Korean cars, Korean mobile phones and everything else. Maybe that's the spirit. But Korea, when it went through the IMF crisis, they couldn't see that future either. But the whole country mobilized because they're saying, look, it is a new world. This is a wake-up call. Let's really embrace it. And that maybe we're seeing not enough in government nor in the business community. Right?
Final statement, Michael. Michael Price, thank you very much for being on Newsline. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your take on economic matters. But are you aware that you are in a country that has the best finance minister in Asia? Are you aware of that?
No, honestly, I was not aware of that. But it is.
There you go. That's one. It was so important that it's missed your research. Michael Price, thank you very much.
Thanks and
on the day that the Capital Maharaja Group has its 40th Executive of the Year award today, later on today at the Stein Studios in Ratmalana, we want to congratulate whoever is nominated and whoever is going to win, and we'll bring you live information from Ratmalana later on in the day. But in the meantime, here from TV1 and Newsline, our group has had the courage to be different. And on that note, thank you for watching us, and see you same time, same place on Monday morning. Take care and God bless.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.